punishment of believers and Orthodox believers is part of Ukraine policy. Now, an Orthodox priest is being at court by the article discrimination upon a religious item. Do you know what his fault is? All the fault of the priest is that he stated in his preach that it is necessary to preserve the Julian calendar and celebrate Christmas on 7th of January. That was a criminal case. Protecting Orthodox canons and protecting the traditions is a crime from the point of view of Kiev regime. They do not even trust their own priests. What do you think? How they're going to check them? It could be funny if it wouldn't have been so sad. They will be double-checked by security service of the Ukraine, and it's not a joke. It's not a joke. The priests of Orthodox Church of the Ukraine will be examined by the security service of the Ukraine. They will have to go to interview and to go to polygraph and to fill in a poll. Can you imagine this? And looks like this is a regular practice for a state which pretends to comply with the human right and supremacy of law in European Union. By the way, what is about the compliance of rights of the believers in the European Parliament? Have you ever heard about this? Well, can you imagine what's going on? We have also noticed that the USA published information regarding Ukrainian neo-Nazism. Within the project of the Forward, Ukraine took the first position in the world as to the number of objects dedicated to Nazists and their allies, including the names of the streets and monuments. Overall, there are 362 monuments of this kind. Well, that's it. And many Western politicians still state that there is no fascism in the Ukraine. If there is no fascism, what can be done with the heroization of fascists and their allies? I recommend to look at the map of Ukraine with these objects being indicated. Most of them, vast majority, is located in the west of the Ukraine. And also, I would like to get back to the accident at Kakhovskaya hydropower plant. They imitate that they make an investigation of the disaster, and they communicate quite rude with international community because they blackmail international community. It's not only provocative behavior. This is behavior with a special sense. They demonstrate to international community that they are ready to do anything to reach their goals. What are their goals now? The preserving of their regime, their rude manner, neglected initiative of the Turkish president on establishment of international committee. I would like to remind you that Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Ukraine, Kuleba, he said that they just play with Russians, and the Kiev regime decided to use services of the politicized and, as you understand, absolutely discredited International Criminal Court. I would like to remind you the activity of this structure is not being acknowledged by 120 countries of the world. The commission, and by the way, this very commission, under the aegis of this structure, was brought to Kherson not by anyone but by CIS Director William Darrens. Here is the justice when American special services bring commissions of international legal mechanism, in diverted commas, instead of, so to speak, to the place where a crime was done. What is this? Is it a new international structure where a prosecutor is a head of American special service? Well, we of course understand the goal to hide the tracks of the crime, and well, then the Russian officials will be blamed, and naturally there will be pseudo orders for arresting them. This scenario is quite clear, and for the whole time it was quite well prepared. This is a cheap theatrical performance, but it is really expensive for those who were victims of this terroristic attack. We have not remembered the provocative actions of Kiev regime in Bucha. Still, Kiev regime hasn't provided the list of people who were pretended to be killed by Russian armed forces.
So this is the organizations which are international and the United Nations never reacted to. Is that something non-ethical to give the list of people they have been showing? These are they who have been showing them on the TV, but saying that pronouncing their names out loud is something prohibited. Is that as a new curve of the human rights, explanation? No, that is something that has been technologically worked on by the Germans. That is also the Mariupol affair, the Kramatorsk, the Irpin, and other locations. The creation of the fakes about Russia is well known, considering the practice of the Anglo-Saxon and European civilizations. That's something we can learn from them, because that's highest level of the informational terrorism and of the fakes that had never been achieved before in world history. We have a lot to learn from them. Let's remember the Skripal affair, the Litvinenko, the Navalny cases. No real investigations on all these provocations being held. Do you remember that that patient have been met and brought to Germany with honors for further rehabilitation? Do you remember that? Merkel visited him, so there was so much attention and public attention. They also accused everyone. They called the so-called guilty. But what's with the investigations, with the materials that they could have shown and could have passed to our law reinforcements who have been responsible for that? How many demands did we send from the Russian side? So did they do anything at least? Nothing. So all this traditional story that was necessary to try to influence our inner political situation. So we are still investigating the Vladian Tatarsky, Daria Dukina, the Prilepin terroristic acts, the Crimean Bridge case. What has been done by the international society considering this tract? Where are the speeches by the responsible people from the international organizations? They are not interested in that. I would also like to draw your attention to the Zaporozhka atomic nuclear energy station. So we receive a lot of questions on what's happening there. So considering the exploitation and safety of the station, we could say that from the 6th up to 20th June 2023, the Zaporozhsk nuclear energy station has not been bombarded. If we are speaking for the period from 8th to the 9th June, and we are talking about the open installation, there have been attacks of the kamikaze drones. So the energy supply for personal needs of the station are being used by the high voltage lines, which is 750 kilowatts Dniprovskaya. We keep signing the contracts with the personnel of the nuclear station. We have signed 3,540 contracts with employees of the station, which is enough to have the safe exploitation of the nuclear station of in the cold installation regime and for the fulfillment of the planned reparation works. So on the 13th of June, the level of water at the storage was 11 meters, and in the cooling pond of the atom nuclear station, the water level was 16 meters. So the lightning of the Energodar city also suffered from the bombardments, but you can also use the site znpp.ru, which have been created for it. So you can follow the situation online. There is a line, there are the articles on the current Zaporozhsk nuclear station, which is updated daily. And there are also the data that is showing that the Ukrainian territory is becoming of the world hub for the dark transplantology, legal transplantology. So that is the illegal extraction and selling of the organs. So there are a lot of facts showing that we have, and we have shown that in the documentary film, Thanks for the Organ. So there we are showing that the Kiev regime is actually exploiting their own wounded warriors to get their organs. But there is the data which is actually being proven. So the business is getting fruitful because of the high losses of the Ukrainian army and the front. So the people who were dead are being burned, their organs are being exploited, and their relatives are being told that these people are just lost and never found. And this is being accepted by the highest level governance of the country. So for the criminals, the country, Ukraine, has become the golden path. So the illegal transplantologists earn just crazy money on it, and they're never going to stop. A lot has been done in order to simplify this transplantologist activity. On the 16th of December 2021, the Ukrainian parliament adopted the law 5831 on the regulation of the transplantology and anatomic materials of a human being. According to this law, you do not need to have a notary consent in written form of his relatives to get this transplantation done. So do you understand what has been done and in which purposes? So if there are documents, we do not need to check these signatures. So actually, the extraction of the children's organs has also been accepted and adopted. So we have seen the simplification of the procedure to extract the organs from the people who died, who never gave the written consent, lifetime consent, to become the donors, the organ donors after death. So this extraction of bone or anatomic materials actually confirms this possibility, but this is something horrific. So you can get the consent of the extraction of the organs and the exploitation from those people who say that they would bury these people. For example, that can be the head of the military unit, or that can be the head doctor of the hospital. So the right for this transplantation is accessible not to the public and state hospitals, but to the private clinics and private medical centers. Do you imagine what is that, a private medical center in Ukraine now? Like any certificate, any medical document, any operation can be done, and they understand they can do that. They can do transplantology, and no one would ever plead them guilty. So they get this right. Why? Because money there is colossal. So on the 14th of April 2022, the Ukrainian parliament adopted the law 5610 on the amendments to the tax codex, which freed the transactions on organ transplantations from the VAT payment. That is not the Ukrainian budget, that is also supplementary control. So all tax officers understand, and all people who do the management and administration understand really well what's happening, because that is a lack of real control of what's happening. So there is no real control like what's being done with these operations. The main beneficiaries of this illegal transplantology are the Western countries. And this scenario has been worked on in Yugoslavia, because all the organs that have been extracted from people who died there, they all were used for the needs of the Western countries. The military aid is being paid by anything. So Ukraine pays even with the organs of its own citizens. One day the Ukraine will understand what the Western so-called friends wanted her to use for. How did they want to use her, to use it, the country? But better late than never. So the country has been sent to the butchery, but then, you have already signed the written consent that you agree to do on everything. But, international organizations actually do not react. So we would like to remind you of the story on the TBU. So when Carlo Del Ponte went and retired, and we never discussed that, well, maybe she felt guilty finally. She wrote the memoirs where she told about this horrific part, and she said that no one ever was punished for those horrific, unhuman crimes. And now let's discuss the comment on the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, Ahmed Abul-Gheit. He called the Security Council of the United Nations to pay more attention on the regulation of all war conflicts all over the world, not make Ukrainian crisis a priority. We all understand that Ukraine is a hybrid war. It's not just a regional story. That is the attempt of the Western countries to get the pseudo-dictator position. So what Ukraine does and what the UN does, that is quite evident as far as it influences the whole world. Just take a look what we have been discussing today, that is the energy sovereignty, that is these are the territories being flooded. That is not just one region, that is not one country or two countries, that is the whole European continent, which then shows the depleted Uranian warheads being sent and being used. So the UN should pay attention to it. But what is being spoken about on the other continents, that we are not speaking about real choice, real search for the solution. No. So now what we see is that we are just showing that no one from the Western countries is trying to find the solution, the way out of the situation, or, just to find a point for communication. They're just using the Security Council to do the propaganda, to promote their political agenda without any real solutions being found. And the UN is not just the advertising agency where you can switch on your microphone and start pontificating with your own idea. That is the organization for the world safety, for the world security. And what is being done? The solutions are being searched for and found. When had been the last time when the Western countries tried to find the solution, to find these meeting points around the Ukrainian situation? Nothing has been done. They have been blocking all our ideas, all our initiatives. So we wanted to discuss the North Stream.
And with the UN Secretary General, they have blocked it, and they keep on promoting their theses about this. So now other continents having questions. So once you are so ungiftedly addressing this to Western people, using the opportunities and possibilities of Security Council, maybe you should do something real, where it is possible to find something in common. In the agenda with the Security Council, there are a lot of crisis situations all over the world, from Africa to Latin America up to Middle Eastern and Asian Pacific regions. Millions of people living in conditions of many years of combatants, and many years of combat actions, and they have lack of food and other humanitarian consequences. Refugees and forcefully migrated people. No, Western people just occupied a Security Council tribune and a General Assembly to use this for the tools of United Nations organizations only for the purpose of propaganda, without any opportunity to search for any real instrument, way to reconcile the situation, to arrange peace. And only for current months, in Security Council of UN, they have planned discussing situation in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Sudan, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, Somalia, and CAR. And this is the list which is not covering a whole range of country and thematic issues which require also considerable looking through by the Security Council. Of course, the world doesn't want to see double standards. And all these topics are in the shadow due to the fact that every day Western people spark Ukrainian theme, not to search the ways to arrange peace, but only for the purposes to again make people talk about the Ukraine the way they need. And also, it's counterproductive to shift the agenda of Security Council to the General Assembly. This practice is being used only for the purposes of deceiving the right of veto. I can provide an example. The launch of 11th special session of General Assembly are aimed at condemning special military operation of Russia, and that takes a lot of resources which could have been directed to solution of global problems of modern times. What kind of condemning? Is it going to bring something? Can it change anything? Can it alter? Can it improve the situation of people in these regions? No. With this way, which is illegal and indecent, the representatives of collective Wests are trying to create an illusion of wide Russian fronts and international affairs, which is provided by the cost of financial pressure and financial blackmailing of the countries of members of General Assembly of UN. I would like to remind you that while establishing UN, the practice of veto was introduced in order for large players to be able to listen to each other and to try to arrive at a compromise. The usage of veto is the red lamp for international community because they could not reach consensus. And the Security Council, in this or that way, could not overcome misunderstanding. This is the reminding what a Security Council was created for, to search, to find, and not to make the groups clash, because otherwise this destructive logic will be overwhelming, and this will undermine the collective security, and this is a dilution of the basic principles which the UN is being based on. We are ready, being responsible founder of international organization and member of Security Council of UN, we are ready to search for a solution to resolve the existing problems, to prevent possible crisis within the current UN mechanisms. And we invite all the members of international community, without any exception, to use this responsible approach. A few words about situation in Afghanistan. The terroristic attacks were claimed by terroristic groups of ISIS last week at the north of Afghanistan with the border province Pakistan. The victims of ISIS were local, acting as governor, and at 2 days they have acknowledged attacks of terrorists, and several dozens of Afghanistani people were wounded. This is another proof for the fact that situation with security in Afghanistan is characterized as very tensed. ISIS is arranging undermining activity against current authorities of the country, and they also target at undermining stability in neighboring Central Asian countries. And here ISIS is being supported by external forces. ISIS representatives confirm financing of the terrorist groups by foreign special services and also presence of terrorists from abroad. And a specific example, it was mentioned by one of the former commanders of ISIS who left his position even at a Republican regime. The blocking of assets still makes it possible for Kabul to sustain the regime, and anti-drug efforts of new Afghanistani authorities and the complicated situation in humanitarian and economical sphere. This is the result of policy of double standards of Washington and its satellites, which combine the support of local populations with political reconciliations. And Russia continues providing free help to Afghanistani people, and in May we have delivered around 1,000 tons of food for Afghanistani citizens, and that was performed within the frames of implementation of main investment along the line of a world product problem of UN. Another issue related to international security, we have noticed that annual report of Stockholm University on peace research, Stockholm International Peace Research Institution published a report, and they have considered, we have noted the statistics about the storage of nuclear warheads at the warehouses, and this reflects quite subjective assessments, and they use their own methodologies of calculation. And I would like to attract your attention to the point that in the part related to the warheads, at the intercontinental ballistic missiles, at the submarines and nuclear warheads, which are counted as the used by heavy bombers, not to exceed the level according to the agreement on measures to further, according to START agreement, which makes 1,550 units. And regarding the issue about compliance of Russia with the START agreement, I would like to remind you that our country has terminated this, and it was the measure we had to do. This was our reaction, and that is why we suspended our participation in this treaty. And the situation on START implementation, which happened as a result of actions of number of negative factors, which prevent the treaty from functioning in full-fledged because of the USA actions. And there is an enemy course of the USA, and they want to deliver strategic defeat to Russia, but that doesn't go together with the principle of indivisible security. And there should be principles of mutual trust and mutual respect and other provisions which the treaty is based on. And without these provisions, the treaty would have never been concluded. What kind of indivisible security and what kind of basis for mutual trust and cooperation can we talk about? So we see the root change of the circumstances in comparison to which this treaty was signed, and it was not possible to arrange relations with the USA and the West as usual, and control of arms cannot be considered outside of the general context of geopolitical and military strategic realia. And also there is uncompliance of the USA with the START treaty as to the quantitative limitation of the arms. And we have mentioned this many times to the USA party. At the same time, the suspension of a treaty can be cancelled. Well, in this case, yes, only if Washington shows the political will and decreases tension and de-escalates the tension and reconciles conditions for full-fledged functioning of the treaty. No other way is possible. And they stated that in Russia there are no doctrine changes regarding a nuclear weapon usage. And in relation to this, I would like to confirm once again that Russia believes that there can be no winners in nuclear war. It should never happen, and we invite all other parties to stick to the same postulates and the joint statement of the leaders of the 5 states to prevent nuclear war and prevention from arms race, and this statement was done on 23rd of January 2022. Nuclear limitation of Russia is of defense nature, and this is limited by extreme circumstances only for defense purposes. And as it has been stated in the military doctrine of the Russian Federation from 2014, and which is supported by the state policy of nuclear restraining from 2020, our country has the right to use nuclear weapon in response of nuclear weapon being used against Russia or Russian allies or other mass destruction weapons, and also aggression against Russian Federation with regular weapons when the existence of the state is threatened. This is the principal position, and it remains the same. And another topic today is the 15th of June. Today we celebrate the Day of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In 2001, and I would like to remind you, the leaders of 6 countries, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan, accepted the declaration on establishing SCO to identify mutual trust, friendship, good neighborhood, to sustain humanitarian connection, security, and safety. In 2017, the members of this unity were joined by India and Pakistan, and in a summit in Delhi, Iran will also join. We are waiting for Belarus to join us, and around SCO there is quite an interesting situation. Or being created. I think the situation is being, atmosphere is being created of interest in this organization because the observers are Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran, Mongolia, and 14 partners on dialogue representing Middle Eastern and Asian regions. SCO, being supported by multi-year experience of international cooperation, participates in arrangement of a new democratic, fair, and rational political and economical international order, and they accent at diversification, at cooperation by the interested parties, specialized institutions of UN system, and constructive international institutions. Of course, is SCO, CSTO, and so on. And we plan to improve communication to provide for reliable and predictable international regional circumstances, situation, sustainable economical development at a vast SCO area. I would like to mention a very important initiative. From 20th of June, there will be patriotic, cultural, educative action, the commemoration train, which is to memorize one of the most tragical date of the history of Soviet Union, the day of commemorance, the day of beginning of the Great Patriotic War. And Matvienko, and head of Republic of National Assembly of Belarus, Kachanova, they have initiated this with the support of Russian railways. Then more than 100 Russian and Belarusian school children were traveling with the train, with a specialized train in 14 cities of Russia and Belarus, and the status of the Commonwealth state was attributed to this action now, and this is also a part of Russia being head in Eurasian Economic Union. They supported the expansion of this project up to CIS area, and it will be joined by guys from Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and more than 200 people. They will visit Brest, Grodno, St. Petersburg, including the festival Crimson Sails, Ufa, to visit the 10th Forum of Regions, Russia and Belarus, and also Samara, Volgograd, Gomel, Mogilov, Minsk, the Day of Independence of Belarus, and of course Park Patriot in Moscow region, naturally Moscow. The children who study in secondary school will be able to commemorate the heroic deeds of the heroes of Great Patriotic War. And also announcement on 19th June till 1st of July in Moscow and St. Petersburg, there will be 17th international contest named after Pyotr Tchaikovsky. 742 applications were made to participate from 41 countries of the world. And that is to the issue about our cultural cancellation, and they never managed to cancel our culture. Piano, cello, violin, woodwind, and brass wind instruments are in the contest. This is the part of national culture. It is arranged once in 4 years, and within the years of its existence, now it is celebrating 65 years, and it is one of the most large-scale and authoritative musical competitions in the world. And I am ready to answer your questions. As far as I understand, today we are in hybrid format. We are going to have online connection. Am I right? Are we going to have questions online?
So what would we start with? Let's start with you. But I know that we will have the international life with us. So please, yes, just 1 second. I will pass the microphone so that everyone would hear us. So the Phoenix, China, Moscow agency. We know that after sanctions, Russia started highlighting its attention to the eastern countries, which is the existing level of the trade between Russia and China, which is the rating, considering the trade. So if we are talking about these U-turns, should be finalized, because if we take a look at our geography, it's quite obvious that we can't, do the U-turns. We have never done that. We are using the possibilities opening to us. We're using the potential existing. So if we see that there are no options available, then there is no sense in growing our effort, because the other side is not responding. So if we see, our partners being rude, then we will not knock at the closed door. Of course, we will draw our attention to the orientations available. So that is better. These words will suit better for the description of the current situation. So considering what is happening lately, so this intensification, could I please draw some numbers? So with China, the last 13 years, we have seen the largest turnover with China. How can we be speaking about the U-turn or the focus change if the last 13 years have shown that our turnover with China has been the largest? So we have, of course, supported it, this growth within the Asian Pacific region. So we have a very good relationship with Beijing, with our Eastern partners. But why? As far as the principles that we use to have, to create the relationships are the same. So that is the respect for sovereignty, the non-interference into the politics of the other countries. So we are not pushing any logics. And this created a very fruitful basis for further development of this economic potential. So let's go back to numbers. So Russia has raised from the 11th to the 10th place. So now we're the 10th largest Chinese trade partners. And lately, this bilateral turnover has been enlarging for 30% and has seen a new record for $85 billion. So that is the real note, the real answer to the Western countries' ideas that we are connected with the East, with the Western Europe. Yes, we might be connected. That is about culture, that is about civilization, but this potential, has not been used by them. And so this potential is being used by other countries. Maybe we do not have such deep connections, such deep interference, did not exist. We had a long history, we had long context, but such a deep level of interference as we had with the Western civilization have not existed before. But where has been this Western Europe these years? They have been launching new sanctions against us. So I would like to ask a question for those who say that our only path is the Western one. Why? Why should we go there? Now it's not efficient. It's even dangerous. It's deathly dangerous. As far as we have been proposing a lot, we have been proposing the mutual respect basis, the mutual respect initiatives. They have all been neglecting. Why? Why would we lose precious time? We would use the possibilities that are available, and they give formidable results. So the current dynamics shows that our turnover has grown for 30%, and that gives us some certainty that the number of $200 billion would be achieved. So if we are talking about this trade being conducted, we do it in our national currencies, and the interest keeps growing. So during the March summit, the heads of Russia and China have agreed on the practical cooperation promotion and the enlargement of the scale of the international trade, and to provide it with the logistics infrastructure to ameliorate the financial and production cooperation, the energy cooperation, the technological innovation, agricultural supply cooperation. And we are sure that this cooperation is quite possible and that it would serve to the further economic development of other countries. I'm often being asked, aren't you afraid that you will be betrayed, that they would lie to you, that there would be a kind of a dangerous development of the situation? Do not be scared, do not be afraid, just be sure that you will be safe. Make yourself safe. Should you be betrayed by the Eastern partners? Well, we have already been betrayed by the Western ones. So why asking that? Our Eastern partners might betray us, but the Westerns have already done that. Why push us to our past? Maybe the interest of the new partners will be proven, that new relationships will be normal, because we have seen the vice versa situation. So considering the Crimean situation, they have not been silent. They have been shouting out about the butchery, about the massacre that had been held by the Ukraine in the Crimea region. You know, that is kind of a perverted betrayal. That's not just a betrayal, but that is a perverted one. So that's kind of a betrayal that is working against them now, because these countries of the European Union are being betrayed by the United States of America, their so-called partner. You see what is being done with the European business. They're being reoriented to the US. And so they might say goodbye to their own political regime. They do not have stable energy supply. They do not have it anymore. So the European economies are working for war. So they are in horrific danger. So all these businesses are leaving. They are leaving to the US. So the Western countries that have been betraying us for 8 years already are now being betrayed by their closest ally, the US. So, you know, betraying is not acceptable. So the large-scale cooperation of such large countries as China and Russia would also stabilize the world economy. When some countries do the protectionist policies, they are using the sanctions to get the unilateral benefits, we are fighting for the equal cooperation in this economic sphere, and we're going to fight for them by the reinforcement of the bilateral cooperation and by working for the economy. So let's take the question from the international life, which is online. So good afternoon. So now we're talking about the Belgium assault rifles. So the Belgium minister said that these rifles who attacked the Belgrade region is just a small episode, and they could just pick them up, you know, in the battlefield. How could we prognose that? You know, that's not just cynical. That is, you know, you should be criminal to say that. If we are talking about civilian losses, how could we explain that? Are they just not smart enough? Do they dehumanize them? What is the logic there? So if the idea is to destroy, to kill as many Russians as possible, then these losses are not, you know, kill as many Russians as possible, then these losses are not, you know, big enough. Here is the answer. Here the answer goes: kill as many Russians as possible. So we are talking about the citizens of Russia, the multinational country, people representing the culture of our country, the Russian culture, I mean. So it also raises the question of whether these people are sane at all. As far as I have the understanding that if you are sane, you will not say such things. So considering this terroristic act to the Belgorod region, one man was killed and 8 people were wounded. The infrastructure has been destroyed. And the minister of Belgium said that there have been minimal losses, insignificant losses, and we are talking about people killed. And these are the official representatives who proclaimed once again the idea of killing as many Russians as possible. So it's complicated to say, like, she would pronounce such things if her compatriots would have been killed. Could she say that about, about African people being killed? But that's what they already say. So there have been a Romanian conflict who compared an African with an ape, and he did it during the official event. So, the example is not a very good one. But could she have said that about French, about the Israeli? Could you imagine the conflict? So if we are talking about the so-promoted thesis on the assault rifles that could have been picked at the battlefield, come on, that's not something real. As far as if we are talking about the interpretation by the Belgian government and the authorities, that is just an impossible way trying to prove themselves and the Ukrainian regime right. So the Belgium has always sent to the Ukrainian regime thousands, tens of thousands of assault rifles and the missiles, the armored vehicles, the rifles of various types. So considering the Belgian statistics, they sent 274 million of euros to support the Ukrainian war parties. And so these supplies of arms and weapons are the violation of the NATO and their satellites of the international obligations on the OSCE agreements. And that is the document which defines the export of war technologies and equipment and pieces of equipment. So if we are talking about the non-proliferation of the weapons and of the armaments, if it is known that the genocide, the violation of the Geneva Convention and the attack on the civilian infrastructure would be conducted. So if we are talking about the gazoduct, the pipelines, we have seen that the world had been shaken and shocked after the video on this inhuman act of the Ukrainian military units, of the violations against the Russian soldiers.
So you do not want to see, they do not want to see that, but I would like to warn that soon they will not be able to ignore this even in the center of Europe, because these, Belgian rifles, which are spread over the combat field, will be in the center of Europe as armament at the black market, and this statistics is already here. And number two, the Kiev regime rebels will come to the center of Europe and will work there for a number of reasons, because it will not be possible to restrain them. We are trying to restrain them. We are now providing for basically security of European continent from new terroristic group which is of a state scale. Now nobody understands that in Europe, and I'm afraid that it will be too late when they understand the situation, but they will ask themselves the same questions as they asked in 2015, in 2016. You remember when we called them to fight against ISIS together, and they were laughing and thinking that these were jokes, and then there was a series of terroristic attacks. Who committed it at the territory of European Union? Who made these terroristic acts? Those people who were encouraged during the colored revolutions, Arabian Springs, by Western people. Is it the first monster that the West created? Of course not. Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden. These were not only best friends, they would not have existed without Western regimes. First, they were created, educated, then they got status, weapons, and then they were aimed against our country in different formats. And then these weapon and knowledge and skills were against their creators. And the same will happen now. I'm very sorry to say this, but it will definitely happen this time again, because the combatants of Zelensky, the people who were abroad in blood for many years, who were trained at humans and live humans, and who were opposed to nationalistic principles, cannot be stopped ideologically and politically. This is objective. So, according to international agreements, it is not allowed to give licenses for the selling of weapons if it's going to participate in armed conflict. And we have warned not once that it is dangerous to supply Western armament and weapons because it can be in the criminal groups and Ukrainian terrorists. It's not the first case with them. There were facts of illegal use of these weapons by Talib's Mexican drug groups, and by chance there were rifles all over Maklam. Was it by chance or what? In the West, they do not want and they cannot control the flow of weapons directed to the Ukraine, and according to Western assessment, these are not our assessments, not affiliated with the Russian Federation. Western assessments say that the market of black weapon, illegal market, is already developing with the weapon which is seemingly supplied to Kiev regime. The Kiev regime sold its own mother, sold Ukraine, sold fathers and grandfathers. What kind of weapons? They will sell everything they can have, which is going to be in their hands. These are the people who have no moral orienters, no ideals which could restrain them. According to the signal which we receive from Brussels, we cannot expect to have fair investigation regarding the circumstances of usage of Belgian assault rifles to attack Russian territory. So expressing this pretended concern as to the facts of usage of the weapon by Ukrainian terrorism, and without waiting the results of the investigation, they report about providing another package of military assistance to Kiev regime for 46 million euros. Then they will say again that weapons were left around the combat field, and the instructors from Belgium located at Belgium and Germany, they train sharpshooters. And I can tell you for sure that the prepared sharpshooters will also be there for them to be able to understand this. And the enumerated facts prove deep involvement of Brussels and other European capitals into the conflict at the Ukraine. And the more representatives of Belgian authorities try to neglect the obvious, well, it's better for them to acknowledge this at once. So we continue. Good afternoon, the news.ru, and the question regarding the New York Times publication. They have said that the USA considers an opportunity to provide to the Ukraine-Israel model of cooperation without being a part of NATO. And how does the Russian party treat this option, and can it help to start negotiations with the Ukraine? You know, in my opinion, it's a kind of humiliating comparison for Israel, because the wildest thing they the ideologists of the White House could invent. They have invented many wild things, but in my opinion, to compare Kiev regime and Israel, well, you know, they had to have kind of perverted brain to invent this. Number one. Number two, a Kiev regime, in its essence, is evolutioning or degrading from neo-Nazist or nationalist into true terroristic international group. Terroristic because they make terroristic attacks against civil infrastructure. International because they are overwhelmed without any identification, friend or foe, by foreign combatants from the whole world, and they recruited them through their embassies, through their so-called diplomats, and so on and so forth. This is number two. So how to make business with a criminal terroristic regime of some international structure? Well, it's a big question mark. There will be kind of precedent. Normally, NATO supported them informally through affiliated structures, terroristic groups, and now they're going to involve them. So this is a new word of North Atlantic Alliance. Well, basically, I would like to remind you that NATO is an aggressive military unit representing threats to security of our country. And basically, from this angle, we assess cooperation with this structure in other countries, and participation in the alliance and cooperation with this does not increase the level of national security of the countries included into NATO, do not contribute to the security in regional, international scale. NATO hasn't proven to be a peacemaker in any region of the world because they do not have experience like this. And regarding the Kiev regime, I have already mentioned this, and regarding the state of Ukraine, what is remaining after experiments of West, well, the best guarantee of security is return of the country to the neutrality and confirming of the status of non-nuclear state, providing for a comprehensive and sustainable regulation and compliance of Ukrainian crisis, provision of human rights of the citizens, first of all, Russian-speaking citizens, and also attributing the official status to the Russian language. I always emphasize that it's strange to call Russian-speaking population a national minority, considering the scale and the quantity of people. But there is such a practice. The Kiev regime should stop combatant actions, and Western countries should stop supplying weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces. So this is a realistic approach to the situation, and not joining NATO or using some Israeli model of cooperation with the alliance, which could help to bring the situation back to the peaceful time. So you can ask as many questions as you want. And question number two, well, ex-president of the USA, Donald Trump, was blamed for 38 points, and altogether he can be sentenced up to 400 years in prison. And mass media say that it's not the matter of justice, but this is the result of political race. And how can Moscow comment this? Because actually this is violation of international law and human rights. You know, it's not surprising. This is the democracy, which is actually a liberal autocracy. And these wild stories are the embodiment of liberalism dictating the order. And what about this 400 years? They consider him immortal. That is why they are afraid of him. That is the only thing I can tell you. But we are going to see more and more of miracles and myths. For a simple reason that liberalism is in deepest crisis. Once it reached the modification of people, manipulation with genders and gender identity and so on and so forth, well, that means that it proves the end of development of this very ideology of liberalism. And here we have strange, scary stories. This story with Assange, the story with the prosecution of those who called themselves disagree with the results of elections of 2016 in the USA and who were trying to somehow demonstrate their will legally. You remember what they were doing with them, the prosecution of journalists and political opponents, and we're going to see this in big numbers, and it is done not for national security or protection, not according to national traditions. That is done only for one purpose, for sustaining this kind of liberal idea active, livable, so that it would not be alienated. They are ready even to discredit this up to the end, so that the others would not understand that this is a scary liberal machine. They are ready for that. They are ready to go for total insanity and absurd, because there is big, colossal money inside. So, please. Just a moment, I will see who also stated that they will join us online so that we would prepare this. So, writer, if you are here, and then now I'm going to answer your question. Izvestia newspaper. I have a question about Nagorno-Karabakh. The USA is actively offering to the representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh to meet the representatives of Azerbaijan, of course, with the presence of American party. And if they reject, they threaten with terroristic operations. Should we expect these initiatives to be implemented by Washington? And which is the goal of the White House? Or are these only threats and provocations? You know, I saw yesterday the materials in mass media regarding this thing, that the USA consider the role of a mediator not as peaceful partner or peaceful expert who can make contacts, and they seem to be threatening the representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh regarding to their citizens, those who represent their interests, and they nearly threatened that they will use force, directly or indirected. I saw this information in mass media today. This topic is being developing, and we are really worried. Once these facts are confirmed, and I believe that the American party has to comment upon this, well, I believe that once again they will undermine their reputation as a mediator. And a mediator is the one who is trying to bring harmony into reconciliation process, who is trying to create peace between the story, to find the contact points. It's for the first time in the modern history I see information about the fact that the country pretending to be a mediator is threatening a participant of the reconciliation process with force to implement their mediator role. They forcefully, they blackmail them to start negotiations and participate in some forums which were created in their minds. Truly, I have never seen it in my life. Well, I believe now we should give the floor to the USA so that they would confirm it or they would explain what they actually mean. And this information is actually shocking. So we have the writer. So can you hear me? Just a moment, I will answer all the questions. You know, so we have a question about the North Stream, and Nord Stream. They have quoted that the German investigation bodies are studying the proofs that some group used Poland as an operative base to make explosions on the Northern Stream. I would like to know the opinion of Ministry of Foreign Affairs about this version, the way how you treat this, and the Kremlin also mentioned that Russia is not included into investigation group on these explosions. And do you have any evidence which would confirm your version of explosions if you disagree with what is being said by Western mass media? Number one, I have a feeling that still we have to take official data for consideration. I am grateful to all the journalists of Russia and international journalists who finally started thinking about what happened at the Nord Stream. I would like to attract your attention that at the very beginning there was information about terroristic attacks, and everyone calmed down. Well, if it's not there, then no. And now we get back to this topic, which is quite logical. In the center of European continent, there was a terroristic attack which destroyed civil infrastructure providing for energy security and energy sovereignty of the European continent. We are not going to mention ecological situation here.
So I'm grateful to everyone who pays attention to this topic. As far as we had an impression that the US and the Great Britain just want to show that this topic does not exist. Just compare the history of the British tablets and American journals about the Novichok, the Salisbury, Amesbury, or whatever it is. They were just hysterical. Or the story of the Russian private military companies which are being affiliated with the Russian government. That interests them a lot. But the Salisbury story, there were people who suffered, but no one died. But there are no official data. There's no official data that shows, real destructions. But here we see that there are problems with safety, with money, with ecology, and no interest. Where there's no interest, there's no hysteria. So this story they make this story to be forgotten. So thanks to everyone who started getting interested in it. Secondly, we should comment on it, and the whole evaluation of the facts should be done not just because the media raises this question, but because, the media and all this information should get to the people responsible for the investigation and people who do the official investigations and who have the rights should pass to the mass media the data which is being confirmed. And now we see a very strange thing, and I don't even find a name for it. That is what we can call a loner game, the journalists' loner game, who cannot get the comments from the representatives of the Western countries who are proclaiming to do the investigation. So the Swedish line, 0 comments, Germany, 0 comments, the US, 0 official comments. We're passing all the information needed, and we're speaking about our point of view, which shows that firstly the US have been against this project politically, economically, and then they proclaim that they will destroy this project. And then we started saying that since then, within this motive, the investigation should be started, and we should hear the official position being proclaimed. So if we are talking about the direct or indirect situation at the pole territory, we might say that there are people who are doing the investigation under the lead of the Western countries. So we're waiting for the official information. Otherwise, if we do not get this official information, we should see that these are the mass media effects, so that people who are responsible for it actually will be able not to respond. So if we are talking about the Secretary General of the UN, So who was ready to do the official investigation? Where are the details? No one's going to share with the results of this official investigation. So we also initiated the Security Council sitting on the 21st of February within this particular topic. We're not going to remind that in March, during the voting, the Western three countries, US, France, and Germany, declined the idea of the official investigation. We are going to repeat this idea in the Security Council. So I'm going to give a direct answer to your question. We are hoping and we are really waiting for people responsible for the investigation, those who said that they guarantee that this investigation will be held, that these people would comment on that to the mass media, and that they would inform the international community of what's being found and what are the conclusions that are being driven from this investigation. If there would be a strong desire to proclaim that they will not say anything till the investigation has been over, we will try to remind that even the judgments with no courts, with no sittings, with no hearings have been drawn up, even without the investigation being finalized. That's what I said to Litvinenko today. That's what I said, that many people died in Great Britain, our compatriots, and investigations should have been conducted, but they have never been finalized, really. So that's why we should address these questions to those who are responsible for those investigations. As far as you know, we have also launched these investigations. We are conducting them, and you have correctly noticed that we are quite limited as far as it all happened at the jurisdiction of the countries who do not let us interfere into the investigation. I have just one precision on this question. You are saying that you are going to draw the UN Security Council to this question, to this discussion. Could you please precise in what terms are we talking? So that was Vasily Nebenza who said that. You can just take a look at what he said. I may find it myself, but I think you will easily do that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, next question, please. So, good afternoon. Business Code Agency. I have the following question, which is connected, to the previous one. So, taking into consideration the importance of Russia's presence at the Southern Caucasus region, and considering the multi-vector practices existing at the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict, I suppose we could admit that there is a humanitarian catastrophe at the Karabakh region. So what are definite actions that would be held by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation in order to regulate the Karabakh conflict, which is quite a complicated and a long-term one? I suppose that the wording of your question actually presumes that we do not participate in it at all. The problem is that I can't agree with such a wording of the question. What do? We do it consistently, regularly, in various ways. There is activity at the highest level. There are meetings and summits with the heads of the Azerbaijan and of Armenia. We have special representatives considering this particular conflict. And of course, our embassies and our experts are working daily on that. That's not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs These are also people responsible for the security in the region, people working at the borders. So if we are talking about precise dates of the meetings, I suppose that we would share with the information when we have it. Because these meetings are usually the finalizing ones or the meetings that would launch a certain procedure or a certain action. But we do not have any pauses, for holidays or for vacations. No, we keep working on a daily basis. But there are a lot of those third parties who would like to moderate, this process. And there are wonderful ideas, like, that the US are going to use some activities to interfere. Of course, if you're talking about the regulation, it just makes it more complicated. It's just a step back, because since 2020, the initiatives taken by our country, by this country, as a real mediator, as a real friend to both countries, to Armenia, to Azerbaijan, who want to regulate it, I suppose it provoked fear. And now this conflict has really become possible to be resolved. And our forces being deployed there, our diplomatic resources and the economic bloc under the lead of Vice President Averchuk keep working in order to regulate it. It actually provokes those who do not wish peace and prosperity to this region. Actually, as we all know, there are a lot of many large players, significant players in this region. And we would like to understand, how would Russia be able to overcome all these obstacles from the so-called mediators? Not least, activities are the diplomatic ones on various levels. Next question, please. Good afternoon. Alexander Martynov, live. The question is as follows. So recently, Vladimir Putin, at his meeting with journalists, said that Russia is ready to hold the best and the most friendly relations with the Western countries. Are there any prerequisites? Are there any possibilities that Europe might change their behavior to normalize the relationships with Russia? Are there any prerequisites for that? And how could we define them? I suppose there are the prerequisites for the vice versa actions. As far there are weapons and armament supplies, and they are killing our compatriots, our brothers who are there at the front line, our nearest, dearest, our friends are there in the country. And they are supplying with the arms and weapons with those who said that Russia should be erased from the territory. And that was Timoshenko, who was shouting to the phone that the nuclear bomb should be bombarded over Russian territories. So they're saying that now they need nuclear weapons, and they started these discussions in 2020. Do you remember the speech at the München conference? Because now they do not know how to solve the Russian question, if we may call it like that. So these are the real prerequisites. We might speak a lot about that, like what Western Europe should do so that the situation would be corrected. But first thing is to stop supplying weapons. Weapons used to kill Russians.
And the ideology which is deep there, when they segregate people for right and wrong, needed and unneeded, good and bad, according to their opinion. What can we do with this logic? I don't really know, because it cannot disseminate within 2 or 3 days. Remember the beautiful garden and jungles, the golden billion and those who should serve for a division on humans and monkeys. What can we do with this? When shall we see prerequisites for something normal? We see PR campaigns, BLM, and some other hashtags and some other forums where they speak about problems of racism, discrimination, and the result is reverse. These PR campaigns are aimed at sparkling of real hatred, but not to the real cure of Western community from permanent phantom pains of colonialism, emperor way of thinking, and segregation of the whole world over those who deserves the right to live and those who should provide this life for them. That's all. And it was not once that at all levels we have emphasized special nature of our civilization connections at European continent. We have always stated that we were willing to cooperate. The North Stream was mentioned. Isn't that our specific input into the desire to arrange proper relations with Europe? Not only in humanitarian sphere, but such sphere which would connect us for many years ahead and which would guarantee stability, economical development. And it's not only about the supply of natural resources. This is a huge sphere of development for science and also the working positions and investments and educational sphere as well, because specialists are required to serve this colossal project. What we got in return? The inability of the Western Europe to somehow secure themselves or protect their sovereignty, and also supply of weapons which they used to kill us. For us having supplied resources to the Western Europe, is this what we are being killed for? And just try to remember how many scandals happened at West. Meghan Kelly, I don't know, many other hosts and highly educated people who were attributed the words which they have never said, and their sense was not there about racism and so on and so forth. These people were pushed away from the information field. Senator Graham said that as many Russians as possible should be killed, and before that there was George Bush Jr. So George Bush Jr. expressed this idea like in privately, thinking that he is not in public, thinking that he is talking to someone personally. But it doesn't make this idea less scary. Any organization, at least somebody on defamation or counteraction to racism and xenophobia, at least if one speaker said that it is not permissible somewhere. We have stated for so many times, and we were trying to protect our common values, and they have not done this, and they did it vice versa. So this is about prerequisites and what should be the signal of sincerity of their intentions, and the signal for us, so that if not to bring back the trusts, but at least to see the history. While they supply weapons from which the citizens of Russia will be killed, and until they allow xenophobic neo-Nazis expression of ideology, we cannot deal with them. TASS agency, Popov Artyom. So as a policy edition says that European Commissions rejected the access to Ursula von der Leyen's personal correspondence with the Pfizer head for about many billion contract to purchase vaccines. And this secrecy undermines trust to the European institution. What do you think about this situation? This is really terrible. This is global hypocrisy and another crisis of liberal dictate. For another reason, see, all Western world is fighting against corruption and they're trying to defeat it somewhere outside. But in the center of this liberal area, the top authorities who identify the policy of the European Union at the European continent, Ursula von der Leyen, is blamed, and that is done not through newspapers, but through specific legal mechanisms in a colossal corruption scheme, namely purchasing from Pfizer for a huge, purchasing vaccines for a huge sum of money. And what do we see as a result? Nothing. Where is European Parliament in this situation? Where is the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe? Where are these endless deputies of PASE who are multiplying anti-Russian materials? Can we see at least one speech of PASE or similar bodies who could think about what's happening inside their countries with these claims and everything? It's not only about corruption inside European Commission, and nothing like that. Because on the basis of solution of on decision of Ursula von der Leyen, those citizens who didn't use the legal vaccines, they could not visit their relatives, they could not continue their business, they could not have urgent trips to the territory of this country, which is a much more scary story. This is a story about the people who took decision on limit our rights and freedoms and who were motivated by high ideals, actually were dealing with this terrible many billion stories. I don't even know the specific sum of these. First I read 9 billion, then 10, then 80 billion. I even no longer understand the astronomy of these figures because it's not possible to understand this, to perceive this. I would like to say more. In conditions of emergency situation in healthcare, head of European Commission, you remember the case. And then she personally decided to control protection of European Union population against pandemic. And there was huge, crazy number of vaccine purchased, which was much more than the population of European Union, and mainly that was from Pfizer supplier. And you cannot even imagine, they never shared these figures publicly, and that is to the privacy of democracy. Actually, everyone should provide everything, and you don't have to share your own data at the same time. There were no contests, there was no witnesses, and these decisions were made on the basis of correspondence. And according to a number of European lawyers, that was cleared up. I would like to remind you that the actions of von der Leyen created questions from the accounting chamber of European Union and were of interest to prosecution office, and they addressed to Supreme Court of France, and even there was a criminal suit. And now they lack the efforts of European commissioners to provide more information. I say that the amount of efforts they spend in European Parliament on complying with the moral values of others, now with this strength they should pay attention to the situation around Ursula von der Leyen. The list of claims to her is quite impressive. The concealing of information, taking the power, let them deal with this themselves. And what's the most interesting for me, where is the Bellingcat? Well, there are some international investigations. You remember Christoph Brozov and someone else, but there was not a single day for them not to attack Russia. They made researches of everything. And I have a question, where is the Bellingcat as a being at European Union, the investigation agency on international investigations? Where are their efforts? Where is Transparency International? I'm just waiting for them to pay attention to this. Where is the huge number of these centers, analytical corporations on research of corruption and crimes? They keep silent. So, I believe let them show themselves. By the way, our liberal investigators who left the country now, for the country of Ursula von der Leyen, they can actually join the investigation. And now, being residents of these countries, they have made their choice. So we continue. Good afternoon, Nadezhda Popova. So as to the explosion at Kakhovskaya power plant, responding to the question of international life, Lavrov told Guterres to look through the Charter of UN more often, not to forget his authorities and liabilities. Could you please explain what was meant by the minister? Mr. Guterres stated, well, sharing the assessment of who is to blame, he said that regardless of who is responsible for the explosion at Kakhovskaya power plant, the incident would have never happened if it were not for the Russian actions in a wider scale. This was the thesis provided by the Western things, and they said that Russia is to blame because Russia began all that. Well, in response to this thesis, the minister expressed his opinion, explaining that if we use the categories of subjective mood, there should be investigation, and those who are to blame should be found. And if we look in the past, which motivated for these actions, the very situation at western borders of Russia would not have been in this condition if Western countries would not have supported the revolution in Ukraine, and as a result of which there was the new regime which oppressed Russian population at the territory of Ukraine, and usage or sharing their territory and everything of what is the property and what should be the properties of the people of Ukraine to Western countries, so that to arrange what was mentioned by the president. And we have one more question. So, and if possible, we should also connect someone. A question like this, not directly related to the international agenda, I would like to know more about you personally. You are always commenting with humor and with sharp notes all the events which are happening. Well, most likely you have some negative reactions from people towards you. People get offended. Does it happen that you are also being offended with this? And what was it? Could you please share? I think that those who keep on being offended, that is their business. And, well, actually, I do my work, and there is my functional responsibilities, my personal resources, and I always emphasize when I express my personal point of view. Thank God in our country it is possible. We are one of the few countries where personal point of view still exists, but I always divide it. I always segregate it. Thanks to my country for this opportunity, and I perform my functional responsibilities and also have my own civilian position. And the events which we witness are such sharp that the reaction towards them should be sharp as well. And also I believe that it's better for the reaction to be sharp than stupid. And is anyone else online with us? Anna Dalu wanted to get connected. No? Well, so we are here. So your colleague from France, Claire Dujand, accused Russia of creating the mirror sites of a governmental institution of France and four largest newspapers for the purpose of undermining democracy. Could you please comment? I will be happy to comment had I understood what she is talking about and what kind of a mirror thing she's talking about. As to the specific data, Embassy of France in Moscow is operating, and I encourage the French ambassador or the person who is responsible for these problematic things to direct materials to us so that we know what this all is about. Before, I have never heard any claims from Embassy of France. Maybe I do not know something, but I will be happy to see some mirror website, number one. Number two, talking about undermining of democracy, well, I wish Madame Anclair Legendre know this. It's not allowing journalists to join events, and Russia Today was not allowed into different information events where all other journalists were invited. Do you remember this many years story, as they didn't get accreditation and so on and so forth? These are creation of obstacles for operating of the journalists, foreign and own French journalists. We saw this many times. This is the not protecting the freedom of word, and we saw the situation with Julian Assange, and they just didn't see the problem, and they were not fighting for this person, and they were not using their own platforms. And you know how many venues are in Paris.
And they have been fighting for one particular whistleblower, you know. So there are so many examples of it. And what they did the labeling of this media. So there have been a lot of fakes that have been fixed by Paris. So these have been fakes against the Russian policy and politics and the African continent. So if the Embassy of France would provide us with the data discussed in Paris, we would gladly study them and do our own evaluation. Could I please possibly ask you one more question? Sure. So Romania, the Baltic states, want to lower the level of the diplomatic relationships with Russia, Romania, the Baltic states. So could you please comment on that situation with the lowering, and could it happen that Russia would preventively do the same with these non-friendly countries? I think that they are lowering the diplomatic communication as far as the highest level provided with the Russian diplomats is something that they can't live with, you know. They can't even exist with us. So there is a certain fight on the European continent under the Washington pressure, which they're interested to bring chaos. That is their credo. And that's what I have mentioned a lot of times. They are aiming to reach Russia, to reach China, but one of the hidden goals they have is the European Union, which for the last decades has declined financially. And it started during the last decades. They have been a real economy, they had real power, and they were even exceeding the economy of the US. And everything just worked really well, considering the Eurasian line. It did not, it was not liked by the US, and that is why what they wanted to do is to do the rupture for the connections being created on the Eurasian territory. So they were shooting it. So if we are talking about the exile of the diplomats, there have been several waves of them. First ones were during the electoral campaign in the US. The second wave was at the Stolsbury and Amesbury, when there have been a whole mystification at the Downing Street, where they were actually calling to send back the Russian diplomats, and they were accused of that. That is just the same story. But if we are talking about the own opinion of the European Union, you know, it exists no more. Is there anyone else online? Yeah? I'm listening to you. So we have Helsinki here. Oh, no, that is Iceland. May I go on? If we're talking about the Prime Minister of Iceland, they decided to close the embassy of Iceland in Moscow, that they are firing all the diplomats, and they are terminating the contract of the loan of the embassy's building in Moscow. What could be the consequences of such a radical step? You know, considering all these actions, what we do, we give the same response. We cannot do the same as far as the situations are quite different. What we see that is a non-friendly step. It is not something what they wanted to do. That was something initiated considering the anti-Russian campaign conducted by the Anglo-Saxons, who are making their satellites to do such things. So we will respond. Why, how, which one? We don't know yet. That would be the one that would be the most prosperous for our country. So is there anyone else online? The Voice of Motherland. We also would like to thank you for having answered to all the questions. We have one question which is connected to the speech to the Russian parliament, where President Putin was talking about the Potsdam and Yalta conferences, which define the international law. So we see that there is the attempt to change the situation, the current situation, and the Russian channels have been discussing that Ukraine will stop existing as the state, and that a part of the Ukraine will become a part of Poland or some other countries. So what is the Russian attitude? What is the position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Would Russia fight for the international law that was fixed and defined in 1945, or the results of the Second World War would be reviewed? You are asking a very global question. The whole world is trying to find an answer to it, and everyone does it in its own way. I think you remember the 80s, the 90s. There have been de facto results being overviewed. So we have seen the revolutions, the Balkan Wars. Isn't it something that we might call the violation of the international law after the Second World War? Take a look at the second block. So that is the demolition of the monuments, the perversion of all the understanding. Isn't that the review of the results, when the criminals are being called heroes, when our war was proclaimed to be an aggressor? You see, there are so many manuals, books, student books that have been published and are being published. That is the second example of what the corrosion of the results of the Second World War can be called. We are trying to defend politically, diplomatically, these results. And we are fighting for these results, holding arms in our hands. That's how it turned out to be, and we are fighting for it. The question is global. It's not applicable, you know. But if we are talking in theory, that is the construction of future of the planet, would it be built on the principles of amnesia, the perversion of the history, or would it be something based on the international law, which comprised the results of the Second World War, and which are the basis of the UN Charter? That's what we fight for. We are supposed to finalize our discussion. We also have one. So that is from Finland. Yeah, we hear you. Thank you so much and good afternoon. I have 3 questions considering one topic. So first, how would Russia respond to the 9 Russian diplomats being sent back to Russia from Finland? Does Russia suppose that there would be Finnish diplomats sent back from general consulate or not? How would you comment on such a solution by Finland? You know, that is just one big question. Or would you have any other questions? That's it. That's it. Then I will give you a profound answer. Unfortunately, Helsinki are being not friendly at all. We are still we're still preparing the response. So as soon as we will do the voting for this response, we will inform everyone on it. I would like to highlight that, and I hope that you would also write about it. That's not our desire, that is just the responding measure. We know that if this response will not be given, they will go further, and that's what the Western countries taught us. Thank you. Is there anyone else online? May I? I have just one big question and a supplementary one. The first one is about the introduction of the Kazakh card for those who enter Kazakhstan. So do you see the discrimination against the Russian population considering it? And for those Russian-speaking people living in Kazakhstan and the 18% of population, and in theory, would there be an introduction of the Russian card as far as a lot of Russians live abroad? Maybe there would be a simplified entry to the country. I have seen this news on the Kazakhstan solution and decision. And so firstly, we should highlight that that is the decision of the country who has its sovereignty and has its sovereign rights. We are in very close contact with our Kazakhstan partners. And thirdly, such initiatives exist in other countries too. They are being realized differently. And what we do, what is our approach, is that the sovereign decision can't be the one to discriminate someone. Such a decision does not have such an idea. Our approach to protect our compatriots is, of course, being run. Of course, it's not being run at the pace we would like it to be. But there are like children who have been born in mixed marriages. Such children did not get the nationality automatically. It happens sometimes in other countries, but it doesn't happen in Russia. So that is just one of the examples of our work. Just one more question, I'm sorry, but has there been any reaction of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Russian citizen Konstantin Basharov, who had been kidnapped by the ISIS? I think I should precise that information. Take a look if there is anyone left online. Yeah, so your personal opinion of the new world order after the successful end of the military special operation. My personal opinion is as follows. People never change. The problems of humanity do not change. They will not change till the humanity understands that we are on the edge. We are on the very dangerous edge, and globally, experiments over humanity will continue. If we are talking about global existential problems, dangers, these are the only things that might change us. To draw a certain conclusion, to pose certain questions, to use the chance being given to us. We hope that we will not come to that age. But knowing history, understand that only global shakes, only global tragedies might sometimes change humanity. And only after that, humanity changes itself, like Second World War. We must have come to such animal condition so that people would be killed in gas concentration camps only after gloves being made out of skin of human being. Only after that we started seeing who are the people being hunted for, who have been oppressed. So let's stay human, let's stay realistic. And thirdly, you know, I agree with you. A lot of things are happening there. There are our men fighting there outrageously, protecting us. So that is a warrior Vysotsky have been writing songs about.
Thank you for this opportunity to ask a question. The Crimea, Andrei Bukharov, and at the beginning of the previous year, there will be International Festival of Youth and Students in Sochi, and the question is whether Ministry of Foreign Affairs will also participate as speaker there as in 2017, and whether participants of all the countries will be able to come there. So about who is going to apply and who is going to join, it depends on visa regime with the countries, and then this is the question to organizers. There are no limitations. I would like to remind you just to specify that we qualify the state as unfriendly only within the context of the arranged policy of the party, authorities, and so on. And it is not related to people who are sincerely aimed at developing relations with us. And regarding the speakers from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I will double check, but I think we have always supported these forums from organizational point of view, and we supported speakers. Thank you so much. Do we have anyone left online? So, thank you. So the last question. Online. Valery Lebedev. Good afternoon. We have just celebrated the Day of Russia, and I was in Moscow, and I have come to the 300-year oak in the botanical garden, and I never saw anyone drunk, and I was really surprised. They keep on talking about the Russian being drunkards. Is totalitarian regime in Moscow prohibiting people to drink alcohol, or Sobyanin introduced such a thing? And I think that your question has an answer. It's not the problem of us. This is the problem of those who write about us. They wrote about these bears in the streets and our being. And you remember the football World Cup, and these people who were watching this, and they saw it personally, and they have compared what they were told at the pages of their mass media and what is really happening. And there are lots of examples of this, and these are the problem of how we are depicted, and this is the problem of ages. And if once we see some drawings from 18th or 19th century, the theme is the same: scary Russians threatening everyone, not being developing, and so on and so forth. The 20th century, the same. So we said that mankind is not changing, and our task and this to change ourselves. That's what we are going to do. Thank you so much. All the best.
Прошу прощения, что мы